Chapters 14 and 15. The Escape. The cave was silent except for the dripping of water over the limestone walls into the tiny underground stream. How long do you think it'll be before they miss us? Joseph asked. Scroggins is right about that, David said. His voice sounded calm, but Joseph could feel his body tremble. No one will look until tomorrow morning. It'll be too dark by the time they realize we're lost. We can't wait until morning. We have to get out of here, Joseph said. We'll never fit through the entrance tied together like this, Zachary said. Maybe if we can get to one of those jagged rocks at the end of the ledge, we can rub on the ropes until they break, Joseph suggested. Maybe. David sounded doubtful. First, we have to get over there. Joseph thought of that day at the centennial celebration. It seemed so long ago now. We have to work together, he said. If we push against one another's backs for balance, maybe we can stand up. We can try, David said, still sounding doubtful. All right, Joseph said. Bend your knees so your feet are on the ground. Then, when I say three, push as hard as you can against my back. I'll be doing the same. 1, 2, 3, he counted. Straining against one another, they rocked back and forth until they were standing. It worked, Joseph crowed. I wasn't sure we could do it. David laughed. Now thou tell me. We have to hop to those rocks, Joseph said. Zachary, you hop forward, and David and I'll go backwards. We'll count together. One hop, one hop. Counting together, the boys started off. The third hop, however, sent them sprawling on the hard, rocky cave floor. I think I've scraped my knees, Zachary said. It's not too bad. Are you two all right? Joseph had cracked his head painfully on the rocks. He felt a wet trickle of blood on his face, and it was a minute before he could speak. Thou art hurt, David exclaimed. Is it bad? I'm all right, Joseph managed to answer at last. However, when he moved his feet, he discovered that he'd also wrenched his ankle. He pushed against David, trying not to put weight on the tender foot. This time, it took them several tries to stand up. Instead of hopping, let's just slide our feet along, Zachary suggested. They crossed the cave with a kind of walking shuffle. It was painful and slow, but they reached the rocks without falling again. Joseph rubbed his shoulder along the rocks, eventually finding a rough place. We'll have to move up and down against the edge of these rocks, he said. He did not tell his friends that his head hurt terribly when he moved it. Zachary grunted. I think it's going to take a long time. It's better than just sitting here, waiting to be rescued, Joseph said. Every minute we wait means Hannah is farther away. Thinking of Hannah filled them with renewed energy. They dipped up and down, pushing hard against the ropes that bound them together. After a few minutes, David called a halt. We're going to wear ourselves out. I think we must just do a slow, steady pace. Joseph panted. His aching head was making his stomach queasy. Do you think it's working? There's no way to tell in this darkness. For all we know, we could be halfway through the rope, answered Zachary. They rested a moment and started again, up and down, this time with a slow, steady rhythm. After what seemed like a long time, they stopped again to rest. How long do thou think we have been here? David asked. Hours, Joseph answered. He tried to stretch his tired muscles. I wish we could sit down for a few minutes, he said weakly. It's hard to get up again, Zachary said. How is thy foot? David asked. Throbbing, Joseph admitted. It's so swollen the rope feels like it's cutting into it. Then we'd better hurry, Zachary said. He attacked the rope with renewed vigor. They rubbed, then rested for a few minutes, then rubbed again. At last, with a final snap, several loops of the rope broke. Yelling in glee, they wiggled clear of the remaining strands. Even though his hands were still tied together, Joseph was able to reach the knot tying his feet and legs. Scroggins had not expected them to get loose, and had not noticed David's carelessly tied knots. It took only a few minutes to free their feet. I think we can get out of here with our hands tied, Zachary said. Joseph agreed. Limping painfully, they inched along the wall until they reached the entrance. Zachary went first and pushed the brush free, allowing them to escape at last. It was dark, but light from a full moon enabled them to see. Joseph sagged against the river bank, feeling suddenly shaky. His head was spinning. David looked at Joseph and gasped. Thou did not tell me how hard thou had hit your head. He tugged off Joseph's shoe and shook his head in dismay. And thy poor foot! Why didn't thou tell me it was so bad? There was enough light to see that the ankle was swollen and purple. Joseph rubbed it gingerly. It felt hot. Zachary scrambled to his feet. You stay here. I'll get help. He climbed over the bank and disappeared. While they waited, David picked at the knots binding Joseph's hands. He talked as he worked, but his voice seemed to come from a distance. Joseph closed his eyes. When he heard horses and shouting, he tried to rouse himself, but the sudden movement brought a rush of blood to his head. He was aware of people climbing over the bank to help. He thought one was Mr. Byers. As if in a dream, he watched his stepfather cut the remaining rope that bound his hands and pick him up as though he weighed no more than a baby. He rested his head against the safety of his stepfather's shoulder and allowed himself to drift away into a darkness that covered him like a blanket. Chapter 15. A Present. There was sunlight streaming through the windows when Joseph next opened his eyes. A stab of pain shot through his head, and he closed his eyes again, grateful for the return to darkness. He was aware of someone beside his bed. Hannah? He whispered. Don't you worry about her, son, Sheriff Underwood answered. I telegraphed every town between here and the river. We'll have her safe by this evening. Joseph drifted back into a healing sleep. When he next awoke, Jared was there. He bounced on the bed, nearly landing on Joseph's swollen foot. Joseph touched his bandaged head. Dr. Mercer sewed you up just like Mama does the mending, Jared said. Clay helped him. You didn't even feel it 'cause you were uh, un unconscious, Joseph suggested. Yes, Jared said happily. I was worried, he added with a frown. We were all worried, said Mrs. Byers, bustling in with a plateful of dinner on a tray. She plumped up the goose down pillow for him to lean on. Joseph sat up, suddenly feeling starved. Dr. Mercer says you should stay in bed a few days, said his mother. Did they catch Scroggins? Joseph asked. Mrs. Byers nodded. The militia's blowing up bridges all over the state to slow down any movement by the Yankees. It slowed down Scroggins, too. The sheriff in the next county caught him. He made it only about 30 miles. She paused. Hannah's fine. As a matter of fact, she's waiting to see you. She opened the door and Hannah stepped into the room. She was carrying a basket. You and David and Zachary saved me, she said simply. She held out the basket, which was which was bouncing about in an alarming way. Your mother says you can keep it. What is it? Joseph asked suspiciously. Look in the basket and see, said his mother with a chuckle. Joseph lifted one side of the lid, and out popped a wiggling black and white ball of fur. Oh! Joseph squealed. Then, oh! Again, as a little pink tongue licked his face. Is he really mine? Joseph exclaimed in delight as he looked to Hannah and his mother. Obviously happy that he liked her gift, Hannah clapped her hands. Jared was still sitting on the edge of the bed, watching with a delighted smile on his face. The puppy bounced over to him and wiggled up onto his lap. There was a paper in the basket. Joseph was startled to see the same neat handwriting he'd seen so many times before. I'm glad to finally meet you. You saved me, that is true. This puppy is a gift to say that I thank you. It was you, Joseph exclaimed. Why didn't you tell us? I thought you might be angry that I found your cave. You can come any time you like, Joseph said. I don't think Zachary and David will mind sharing it. Jared was holding the puppy and crooning softly. Looks like I'm going to have to share this puppy, Joseph said cheerfully. I gave David a puppy too, but Zachary's father wouldn't let him have one. David said he would share his puppy with Zachary. Do you like the puppy? Asked Mrs. Byers. He's perfect, Joseph said. He looked at Hannah. You didn't have to give me anything. I really didn't do anything except get myself captured. If you and David and Zachary hadn't come along, I might be in the South right now, being sold to be a slave. Hannah shuddered. Maybe someday soon there won't be any more slaves, Joseph said. My papa says if that day ever comes, it will be a long time. The South will fight long and hard not to change their way of life. The puppy curled up beside Joseph and fell asleep. He stroked his soft fur. I have to think of a good name for him. Jared patted the puppy's head. You could name him Softy, he suggested. He needs an important name. Something to help me remember today, Joseph said. You could call him Mr. Lincoln, Hannah suggested. That's it, Joseph exclaimed. I'll call him Abe. That's a fine name, Mrs. Byers said. Now I think everyone needs to let Joseph rest. Joseph groaned, but in truth he was tired. After everyone left, he curled on his side. Abe snuggled close to his heart, and Joseph watched him. He thought about what he would tell his stepfather when he arrived home that evening. The country might be on the verge of falling apart, but together the Byerses would be strong enough to face whatever the future brought. The puppy was sleeping. Joseph watched him until his own eyes grew heavy. After a time, He closed them, and together they slept away the afternoon. More about Joseph. The civil for civilian war was the worst tragedy in the history of the United States. Americans had fought the English, French, Mexicans, and Spanish. This time, however, they were fighting one another. The Civil War was fought over two burning questions: whether or not people had the right to keep slaves, and whether or not individual states had the right to leave the United States and form their own government. Most people in the North answered no to both questions. Abolitionists had done a good job helping ordinary citizens understand the evils of slavery, and they did not want the Union to come apart. In the South, many people, while admitting that slavery was not a good thing, nevertheless thought it was necessary to their way of life. They decided to secede from or leave the United States in order to live the way they wanted. The northern states were not prepared to let them go without a fight. By May 1861, 11 southern states had formed the Confederated States of America with Jefferson Davis as their president. For many, the Civil War started with a sense of excitement and even fun. Young men joined the army, expecting to have an adventure and be home again in a few months. What they got was 4 years of terrible war that killed more soldiers than were lost in the American Revolution, the War of 1812, the Spanish American War, World War I, World War II, the Korean War, and the Vietnam War put together. Nearly every family lost a husband, a brother, a son, or a cousin. Men died in the fighting, and they died from disease and hunger. Although Kentucky managed to stay neutral, refusing to join either side in the conflict, the loyalties of its citizens were sharply divided. 50,000 Kentuckians joined the Union Army, and about 35,000 joined the Confederate troops. Here are some interesting facts about Joseph's time. Dr. Mercer believes that cleanliness in the sick room will help his patients get better. Most doctors of that time would have disagreed with him. In fact, bathing too often was considered bad for you. Doctors went from patient to patient without washing their hands, spreading the diseases they were trying to cure. One of the most common treatments was bleeding, or draining bad or diseased blood from the body. This was done by lancing, piercing the skin, probably using a dirty knife, or using leeches to suck out the bad blood. These procedures only weakened the patient and made it harder to recover. When Joseph goes to Zachary's house, the boy is headed for the necessary. Did you guess what that was? If you said outhouse, you were right. If you were lucky in those days, your school might have two necessaries, one for girls and one for the boys. The vendor at the Branson Mills Centennial Celebration calls out, "Goober peas! Fresh roasted goober peas!" Did you guess that goober peas are peanuts? That concludes Joseph 1861, A Rumble of War. The author, Bonnie Pryor, has written other books of historical fiction that you might be interested in. Other popular books by Bonnie Pryor include Thomas and Luke 1849 on the Golden Trail. Thank you for listening.